Hi there, and welcome to Next Frontier. My name is Thomas Andersen, founder and CEO of Responsibly, and Next Frontier is my show about sustainability in the supply chain. Today, I'm talking to Matthew Yamatin. Matt is fantastic. I found him through the Sustainable Procurement Pledge, which is a great resource that you should check out if you're not already familiar. He published a case study on how Thermo Fisher engages with both customers and suppliers on renewable electricity adoption. Fascinating and a great topic for the show. So I invited him on to discuss all things renewable electricity. Matt has a background as an environmental engineer. He has worked with sustainability and renewable electricity across the US and China, and he's now Sustainability Program Director at Thermo Fisher. He's both passionate and incredibly knowledgeable about renewable electricity. So this was a fantastic discussion, and we really got to nerd out. We talk about how to adopt renewable electricity programs in the supply chain, both power purchasing agreements and suppliers installing on-site generators. We'll touch on the state of the renewable electricity sector, what's going on with SBTI and the greenhouse gases protocol when it comes to recognizing renewable electricity. We'll talk about something called the duct curve, and we'll even comment on geopolitics and China versus the US, which is particularly interesting as it was only a few weeks ago when we recorded this that China announced their first ever climate targets and the US abandoned the Paris Agreement. This is a really good one. Okay, Matthew Yamatin, Sustainability Program Director at Thermo Fisher. Here we go. Hey, Matthew.
Hey.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah, it's been a good couple of weeks. How about yourself?
Fantastic. Very busy here. I don't know what's going on, but October for us is always conference and travel month. So last week we were in Amsterdam for a conference. This week and next week we're going to London 2 times. And then I made the accidental mistake to also give my wife a trip to Paris in the weekend, which was very nice. But the suitcase stays unpacked for a couple of days between each trip, so it's a little bit much in October.
No, I can understand that. I didn't get to go down to the New York City Climate Week. We had a few colleagues who did. That was a big event, I know, for a lot. I have a few coming up, more local here in Boston. So yeah, fully understand it's interesting, isn't it? How just everybody packs conferences into a good 4-week span.
I think it's something about coming back from vacations and then being ready to tackle the next year, but you want to wrap up in Q4, something like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
What kind of events do you normally go to more locally, Matthew?
So I'm in the life sciences space. So there's a lot of life sciences conferences here. There's one called ESG in life sciences. There was a manufacturers alliance, again, on sustainability. So it tends to be those. Again, the focus tends to be a lot of the same things. It's renewable electricity, it's scope 3, it's regulatory type reporting. But yeah, everything kind of from a different angle, different perspective, depending on the audience.
Got it. And what was kind of the feedback from your colleagues from the New York Climate Week?
The number one was, this is really difficult, and everybody, regardless of industry, facing the exact same challenges, which again goes to, we've been talking a lot. There's been a lot of talk over the last, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years. Getting to action in a concerted manner, extremely difficult, and being able, I would say, to scale. Everybody can do an ad hoc project here and there that they've I did an EV vehicle. Like, how many? I did 3. How many do you have? 1,000 to go. Okay, so how do we scale that?
Got it. That's interesting. And what's kind of your I need to ask this, right? Because of course one of the big themes this year, I guess, was 1, China setting targets, and 2, US pulling out of the target. So how does that feel like working with sustainability in the US? Like what's the atmosphere in your industry like over there right now?
So I'll break this into 2 pieces. There's the personal feelings about it, and then there's the business feelings about it. I think personally, all the practitioners are a little bit down, kind of seeing the regression. You never like to see that. You kind of want to see this incremental progress. So that's tough.
Yeah.
Particularly a lot of the canceled funding for a lot of renewable and other projects.
Hmm.
I think that definitely sets us back a ways. But on the business side, everybody I've talked to, no change.
Hmm.
Again, whatever their driver was, whether it was customers, whether it was regulators, that is still happening.
Hmm.
So from a business perspective, everybody asks, you're like, so are we changing the plan? I'm like, no, plan's
Hmm.
still the plan. Nothing has fundamentally changed. We're still going to proceed at the pace we are going to proceed at.
Hmm. That's fascinating. And I guess that kind of makes sense, right? Because if I'm thinking, of course, we're seeing it from the other side, talking to a lot of companies that are implementing sustainability, right? And for us, the US has always been behind the EU when it comes to regulating sustainability. So that also kind of makes sense that then when the government is then pulling a little bit back from it, well, maybe the government was never really pushing it that much to begin with, right? So I guess a lot of the action and agendas was coming elsewhere from.
Yeah, I think you'll hear a different story depending on the industry. Some industries were very pushed by the government or
Okay.
they're, heavily funded
Mm,
by programs from the government, whether again, US, EU, APAC,
mhm,
and the like. I think there are other industries that are very much customer centric. Now, whether that's, individual consumers, whether
mhm,
that's a B2B business model, whether that's, healthcare agencies, particularly in Europe. um, so I think it depends on your stakeholder group.
mm.
So for those who are, customer centric, again, whether it's B2B or B2C, those mega trends haven't changed. So they're not really impacted where, if your entire business model is dependent on, the direction of the government, then you're fundamentally in a different position than you were, say, a year ago.
Got it. Interesting. Fantastic, Matthew. We got straight into geopolitics
We did.
without without me even saying welcome to Next Frontier. It's really good to have you on.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Excited.
Yeah, super excited. I found you through the case study you guys did on
Mm.
renewable electricity adoption in the value chain with the Sustainable Procurement Pledge, right? So that's how
Yeah.
we found each other. And I think that's, of course, also what I want to talk a lot about today. I want to nerd out on renewable electricity, a little bit about the case study, what's going on, how you work with suppliers, stuff like that.
Mhm.
But I also think you have a quite fascinating background. So I'd love to hear a little bit. How did you end up working with renewable electricity at Thermo Fisher?
Sure. I'm not going to bore you or the audience. So I think for me, the big backstory is
Yeah,
for some reason I did a class in 11th grade, environmental sciences, and for some reason that just like it clicked in my
it caught
brain,
on.
and it was like, oh, that's what I want to do. That's the problem I want to solve. So then I figured
Amazing.
out how the heck do you solve that problem? I was 11th grader. I didn't have any idea. Somebody said environmental engineering. I'm like, cool, I'm going to do that. Turns out environmental engineering at the time, you build landfills and then you do wastewater treatment plants.
Okay.
That was not what I wanted to do. So anyway, I did some pivots, spent some time in China, and eventually made my way to where I am today, which is Thermo Fisher.
Hmm.
Um, I always saw, I mean, I was an early reader there was a professor out of Stanford who basically indicated, hey, it's possible to transition the entire United States to 100% renewable electricity. This is not a make-believe theory. Like,
Hmm.
we've done the math, it works. Is it challenging? Yeah. Can it be
Hmm.
done? Yeah. So I think from that perspective, I've always seen, at the end of the day, it's transitioning away from fossil fuels, it's phasing them out.
Yeah.
So that is one of the biggest ways to do that. If we can move the entire electrical system to renewables, then
Hmm.
it's just a matter of, diversifying the fossil fuel generation over to electrical sources.
Hmm.
So for me, it's just like, oh, this is the biggest, easiest win to make the most impact the fastest. So I think that's what's always made it gravitate to me.
That's fantastic. And how was it working then with sustainability in China? Because I guess they're having huge advancements on the renewable electricity wave, right? Did you feel that when you were there? Like, was there a different attitude or?
So we actually, when I was there, we met with a few solar developers,
Mhm.
and we actually got to luckily, like one of the largest manufacturer and developers of solar panels just happened to be in Beijing where I was. So they had this
Okay.
really cool innovation center. So we were able to take a tour with some of the students at the K to 12 school that I was with, and they had the most advanced things. So they had solar roofs. They had
Mhm.
solar on backpacks. They had the entire building itself had a solar walkway. So you just walked on solar panels.
Wow.
It was really neat of seeing, like, this was their vision of the future.
Hmm.
So from that perspective, I think the innovation that comes out of China is just mind-boggling, and
Hmm.
it opens your eyes to, if you have the vision, it's possible. I mean, you got to put the money in, you got to put the effort, but it's very possible. Like, you just saw it with what they were able to do. So I think that
Yeah.
really, for me, opened my eyes of, yeah, there's a lot of trouble, but it's possible. You just gotta make it happen.
Fantastic. Was there more talk about renewable electricity there, given the solar being so big and the kind of the industry around it being so mature, or was it kind of same as you see it in US?
I would say it's almost business as usual
Okay.
there when I was there. It's like,
Okay.
oh, you want to do solar panels on your roof? Great. Yeah, we do that for a whole bunch of people. Now, one
Yeah.
would say that's not dissimilar from the US. But yeah, it was very much everybody supports this. We can make it happen.
Hmm.
We got to do the checks, of course, but it's just, let's just do it. On the bright side, it definitely saves you money in most cases in China.
Hmm.
We found that to be the case. So from a cost effectiveness, like, it's a win-win.
Mm.
If you're a school, you got the educational aspect, you got the money saving aspect, and you're reducing your impact. So it was a pretty easy win there. And I think I left, but the school installed it about a year later. So now the entire roof has solar.
Interesting. And so one thing I'm wondering, right, is as we see kind of the amount of renewable electricity coming out of China, and also just knowing how most companies calculate their emissions, which is, with emission factors, sometimes even just based on, renewable electricity makeup in the country, right? Will we start seeing Chinese suppliers, do you think, outcompeting Europe and the US and elsewhere on their kind of decarbonization program just because the government is so mature on it?
Potentially, but that's a long runway. Um,
You think so?
so, I mean, as fast as China's moving, and they're moving, I think we all know they're moving faster than everybody else combined.
Hmm.
There's still so much coal
Okay.
integrated into the electrical system in China. Their
Hmm.
emission factors are way higher than, like, way, way higher than Europe.
Hmm.
And they're way higher than most of the United States. There's pockets of coal in the United States,
Yeah.
but most areas, if you're talking, Northeast, West Coast, um, the Mid Atlantic, which has a lot high nuclear percentage in the U.S., like, their emission factors are quite low at the
Yeah.
moment. So it's going to take I would say, a long time for China to get there. But
Okay. Interesting.
I'm certain they'll get there. But it's going to take some more time. They need to keep their progress and keep diverting off of coal.
Okay. Fantastic. Super interesting, Matthew. I want to talk a little bit about that case study that you guys did. Can you help walk me
Mm.
through a little bit, like how did you guys work with renewable electricity in the value chain? I guess it was both customer and supplier wise, right? But tell me a little
Yeah,
bit about that case study and what you guys did.
yeah. So we ended up doing two different deals with customers and suppliers. For us, it was, hey, we're a big company. We
Hmm.
have a very large load. Could we do this on our own? Yes, of course, we
Hmm.
could. But you're not really having the impact if you're just going by yourself. And as a company, we are very dedicated to our customers and suppliers. So we thought, how do we amplify the impact? How do we reach out across the value chain and say, hey, we're going to go out, we're going to go procure some renewable electricity. We're going to go with some developers, get a new build um, in Europe and in the United States. How about wherever you are on your journey, we can help you get to the same place. So maybe,
Hmm.
this is your first one. Maybe you've already done two, but you're not big enough to go by yourself. We would really like to invite you to come along with us on this process, and then together we can get, the best deal that we can get. and make sure that we can all have the impact that we want to have at the end of the day. So that was really our thinking going into this. It ended up being very successful.
Mhm.
So both deals have been signed. One is operational, another should be operational in the next few months. And yeah, we have numerous suppliers and customers that joined us in those deals. So I think collectively, we doubled the impact that we would have had just by ourselves.
Amazing. Okay, so tell me a bit more about that. So when you say deal, I guess you mean a power purchase agreement, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, they're called a power purchasing agreement, otherwise known as a PPA. The
Yeah.
intent
What is that?
there is, yeah. So if you think it really simplistically, you have a solar developer.
Hmm.
They want to build something, but they need somebody to buy the energy
Hmm.
and make sure that, so once they have somebody to buy the energy, they can go to the bank and say, hey, I got a buyer. Can you give me the money so I can build the thing?
Hmm.
So that's essentially how it works is they have all these projects that they would like to build. And they're like, hey, we just need some buyers. So
Hmm.
then this is where the corporates come in. Obviously, it can be other sources, but corporates have a big driver in the past few years. We all go in and say, hey, we really want to buy, we want to support you, we want to invest in this, we want to be able to make sure that we can, we'll get the claim of renewable electricity.
Hmm.
So we want to make a deal with you, procure the entire site, portion of the site, whatever it is. We do a fun little negotiation that it gets a little complex. Definitely need your lawyers involved. But once you get through that part, you sign it. They get all the guarantees. They can go to the bank and then say, hey, I got somebody to buy it. Please, complete all the funding. And then they just go ahead and they build it. And that's it. And then once it's operational, what generally happens if all that energy that's generated, that just goes to the grid.
Hmm.
And then generally you would take the renewable energy certificates.
Hmm.
And then that's how you can essentially claim renewable electricity. That's just how the accounting ends up working in this particular avenue.
Got it. So I guess the whole argument is that these kind of new facilities, they require a lot of upfront investment. That's a little bit of a chicken and the egg system. So if you kind of lead with your domain, then you can help more of these facilities get built, which will then increase renewable electricity of the grid and kind of decarbonize the country, I guess. How does that work like geographically when you make those deals with customers and suppliers? Like, do you have to be bundled together close to each other, or how do you do that?
Sure. So there's a current set of rules. The rules might be changing from
Mhm.
what we're hearing from the NGOs, but under today's schema, there's defined grid regions. So, for example, Europe is considered one grid,
Okay.
and then in the U.S. and Canada, that's considered one grid.
Mhm.
So, what that essentially means is you basically say, "Oh, I have this many facilities that are using this much electricity in these, and across Europe."
Mhm.
I will then, then we went to our customers and suppliers. You're like, hey, I have this much load in Europe. How much load do you have? Hey, if we combine our loads, then we have X amount. We can go to the developer and say, hey, we need X amount of load. And then we essentially, whether it's Spain, Italy, or the like, unfortunately, UK is now outside thanks to
Mhm.
Brexit. So they're kind of their own market. But otherwise, you just go to the developer and I need X amount in Europe. And then they'll
Okay.
say, yeah, I got these projects, and then that's essentially then you sign it, and then you can get to allocate within that grid region. So that's essentially how it works at the moment. There are discussions to close and kind of narrow those regions a bit more.
Mhm.
So potentially looking at Europe at a country level, and potentially looking at US at more of the kind of the grid level. So again,
Okay.
some would say it would restrict where you can purchase a bit more than today. There's going to be some trade-offs with that. I'm not going to necessarily get into those arguments at the moment, though.
Okay. Interesting. So when you said you guys did two deals, was that then Europe, US, or
So we've done four in total. So we have
okay?
two in Spain. Those are the ones that
Mhm.
we did to customers and suppliers, and then we have two in the U.S. and those we did by ourselves.
Okay. Interesting. And maybe we're getting a little bit into the regulatory side, but I'm just kind of thinking one of the things I read back when I was reading a little bit up on China's renewable electricity adoption. Sorry for going all China. I don't know why we're talking so much about China today, but I remember one of the things I'm reading was that they were quite successful in scaling out the infrastructure. But one of the big problems they still have is distributing the energy via the grid, right? So one thing is generating the electricity, another thing is actually getting it into the grid in a good way. Is that what's behind the kind of the narrowing down the regions? Because I could imagine, you put up a solar plant in, I don't know, Norway, probably a terrible place because there's not enough sun, but you have all of the kind of the electricity generated from the hydro plants, etc. There might not be a big need for it. It's not going to significantly change the grid mix or something like that. So is there logic there of kind of saying we want to narrow it down a bit, or how does that actually work?
That's the theory I think that a lot of folks have. So if you dig it like one step deeper into that, so let's take Europe for example,
Hmm.
Norway, although not good solar, but great for wind.
Yeah.
But from that perspective, so our projects that are in Spain, um, the challenge here, and this is kind of the challenge that China largely has solved to a large
Hmm.
extent. I guess let's use China as an example. So the Gobi Desert. So you're talking like just north of Beijing and then going west.
Hmm.
Basically, you don't have much clouds. It's basically, again, it is a desert. So you
Yeah.
have amazing sunlight all year round. Challenge is as you go further west, that's not where the people are in China.
Hmm.
All the people are on the coast generally, so
Hmm.
Beijing, Shanghai, etc. What they've done and what Europe has not been as successful doing, and as well as the US, is they really build ultra high voltage transmission lines. So you can
Hmm.
push a whole bunch of power from basically the western part of China to the eastern part of China.
Hmm.
Um, Before they did that, the challenge was essentially they were having to turn off those generators, whether it was wind or solar, because they had too much in the west and they could not get it to where the power was needed. So that's why they built
Wow.
these ultra high voltage lines. You're seeing something similar, I would say, in Spain,
Hmm.
kind of moving back to Europe, where because of the mountain ranges, it's tough to get electricity from Spain up into France.
Okay.
So they do have a few lines, and I think they're planning on building another one.
Hmm.
But if you don't have that conveyance of electricity from where you're generating to where you need it, then you just have these imbalances that start being created. So I think that's the most challenging thing of renewables is it's unlike fossil fuels where you can just plop a plant down anywhere.
Yeah.
Renewables need to be where they're best generated, which is
Hmm.
not always necessarily where they are most consumed. So how do you get power from where it is to where it needs to be? And I think that's the biggest challenge that a lot of folks are running into. So that theory of, hey, let's build it closer to where it's needed is in the minds of some people the thing that should be done.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be done like that. China has
Hmm.
indicated that you don't have to do it that way. There's other ways, but that's the theory of people wanting to narrow the grids.
Okay. Fascinating. And do you have any idea how much effectiveness or efficiency is lost when you start transferring power through these grids? Like, can you keep the majority of the electricity? Do you lose a lot? Like, how does that work?
So don't quote me on this, but the new lines that they're building, if I recall from reading about it a couple of years ago, again, it's the ultra high voltage lines. You're not losing that much. It's a couple percent.
Okay.
So you can shoot it over a really long way. Um, because of the way they're designed, it's very similar to what you're losing locally,
Hmm.
with kind of lower voltage lines. So are you losing some? Yes, but you're going to lose some whether you're
A little
local
bit.
or really far away.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, fascinating. But then it kind of makes sense, your argument, right? To say, hey, we need these generators where they are most effective, right? Where there's a ton of wind, ton of sun, hydro, whatever. And then we just need to build out the infrastructure. Does the private sector have a big role in that? Like, is that something that you guys were thinking about? How do we get that infrastructure built? Or is it mainly we have demand, let's use that demand to facilitate kind of the generator buildup?
From what I've seen, the concept of the infrastructure
Hmm.
generally been separated from the development. So corporates don't get involved in, ultra high voltage lines. That's generally, the grid operators or the government in the case of China, where they say strategically we need to have lines here
Hmm.
and here. And then they go ahead and build that with the forecast of, hey, we think this is going to be a big, a solar hub. We think this is going to be a wind hub. We need to make sure that we have the ability to get, power from here to where we think it's going to be necessary.
Hmm.
So I would say common people and corporates are definitely less involved there. That's a little higher order planning
Hmm.
than we're privy to.
Got it. Okay. And let's get back to kind of the PPAs, the power purchase agreements, supply chain collaboration, stuff like that. So there's a little bit of a scale argument, it sounds like here, right? Gathering a lot of players, gathering that demand, and then using that demand to kind of get these projects going. Does that also mean that there's like scale pricing where you can start saving money on it by pooling demand together? Or is it more focused about, let's get this project up and going, not about leveraging our bargaining power to kind of get a better cost?
I think the one way to think about this is the more play, the small, the smaller amount of load, meaning the more players you need involved to
Hmm.
basically take a full project that's built, the more complexity that is for the developer. It's more contracts that they have to do. It's more
Hmm.
partners that they have to converse with once the thing is operational. I'm not a developer. I don't know how they're doing their pricing model. What I've heard is if you can take the full amount of a project, it's just easier for the developer. The easier
Mm.
things are for a developer, the more they're incentivized to do it, the better pricing they'll give you. Now, is that 5%? Is that 1%? I honestly don't know. But yes, it generally is advantageous to either be the big hyperscaler, obviously, the Google, the Microsoft, they obviously these eat these projects up like crazy. For us smaller players, yeah, at times we have to bundle our load with others to try to get that same scale.
Okay, interesting. So how does that then practically transfer to value chain engagement? Was there like when you guys started out in these programs, how did you select kind of parties to participate in that program?
I think the first one was when are they important to us?
Yeah.
So are they a strategic, customer or supplier? That's the number one. The number two is how mature are they? If they don't have a science-based target, this is probably going to be outside of something that they can turn around and do in 6 months.
Hmm.
So you need somebody who's high enough maturity where you can kind of bring them in. They don't have to have a project done before. They can be new to this, but as long as they're mature enough to be able to, one, you want to ensure that they can probably say yes to this.
Hmm.
If it's questionable whether they can even say yes, then it's hard bringing them in and then basically having them drop out mid-process. The developers don't
Yeah.
particularly like that. So those are really the two considerations that we had is maturity and are they strategic to us?
Interesting. And the reason strategic method, was that because you have more leverage there and better conversations with them, or?
I think the idea there is we want to have a long-term relationship with you.
Hmm.
So one, if they're a supplier and they're, we help them get renewable electricity, obviously we're going to benefit from that. That's their scope two. They're going to reduce their scope two, which is then becomes our scope three. So
Yeah.
we want to make sure that, there is this beneficial chain of events. From a customer perspective, again, this is just another way that we demonstrate that, we're helping them. Our tagline, enable our customers to make the world healthier, cleaner, safer. I think it's
Hmm.
just another demonstration of the way that we're trying to do that outside of, the standard, here's our products and services, here's a different way that we're doing this.
Hmm. Okay. That makes sense. So it sounds like if you want to kind of do something like this in your own supply chain, you probably want to go with where you have your spend concentrated and where the suppliers are bigger. It's probably not something to roll out across the long tail, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think with a lot of these programs, if somebody else were to do this, my advice would be, yeah, focus on, your top 10, your top 20.
Hmm.
See which of those are mature enough, which of those
Hmm.
you have a planned long history with, and those would be the first individuals I would have a discussion with.
Got it. And is this only for renewable electricity, or are there ways to work across other kind of renewable energy forms?
Renewable electricity, obviously, it's the biggest. It's by
Yeah.
far the most advanced. It has the contracting structure where
Hmm.
this becomes, I'm not going to say easy, but it's very doable.
Hmm.
More challenging when it comes to other energies. You might see people trying to collectively um, support biomass
Hmm.
or biomethane. Challenge with those are the GHG protocol, which is kind of that foundational. Here's how you do carbon accounting. Here's what counts and what doesn't count. They
Hmm.
currently say biomethane doesn't count.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of unfavorability in terms of trying to do this in other spaces.
Hmm.
Sustainable aviation fuel is another one of those gray areas right now. GHG protocol
Hmm.
just doesn't mention it.
Okay.
Some people are accounting for it, some people aren't. That's another one where you can kind of go in and say, hey, whether with an airline or with a sustainable aviation fuel uh, generator, hey, I want to go in, we're going to pool our demand. I think this has happened on a few occasions. We want buy a whole bunch. And that really gives that demand certainty. And it's all about that market signal at the end of the day.
Mm.
Is there a demand? Is somebody willing to put money up front in a contract to say, I will buy this over the next 5 years, whatever it is. And then, that developer says, hey, I have the demand. I can now expand my business.
Hmm.
So at the end of the day, yes, it's all about market signals, whether it's renewable electricity or whatever the next thing's going to be.
Okay, interesting. It's funny you mentioned sustainable aviation fuels, because we've been involved in a few projects with British Airways, and of course that is like one of the core pillars of their sustainability strategy, right? And one of the things we learned from them, which has nothing to do with what we do, is that their demand for sustainable aviation fuel is like huge, way higher than there is supply in the industry. So there, the whole kind of industry problem is the amount of supply, not the amount of demand, right? Which is a bit fascinating to think about. Is that different when you talk about renewable electricity? Is the kind of the bottleneck demand or supply, or how do you see that?
At the moment, it seems pretty even. There
Okay.
are no. This is U.S. aside. This may change in the U.S. given current situations.
Hmm.
Um, but generally, historically, over the last few years, when we were doing these deals, there was always plenty of projects that wanted to be contracted with, that wanted to be funded. So
Hmm.
that was never an issue. I think there was definitely more of um, it was a seller's market for a while, then it turned into a buyer's market. I couldn't tell you right now which is on which side. Overall, though, it's been pretty even. Folks who want to buy, there's been projects. I think projects that want to find buyers. There have been buyers. Obviously, you just need to have the right pricing.
Hmm. Okay, makes sense. I want to go a little bit back to one thing you mentioned in the case study. There was a section about things to watch out for, and you guys wrote that you needed to watch out for expecting suppliers to increase the use of renewable electricity without guidance. Now, I have an idea what you meant with that, but I would love to get your commentary a little bit on it. Like, what was kind of your experiences there, and what specifically did you mean when you wrote that?
I think the concept of that was a lot of these suppliers, the push is to have suppliers set science-based targets.
Mm.
The easiest way to hit your science-based target is to get renewable electricity.
Hmm.
So much so, in fact, that again, the Science-Based Target Initiative, which is NGO, kind of setting the gold standard of what a target should look like.
Hmm.
They're also updating, and they basically say, okay, everybody's just doing scope 2. Everybody's just doing renewable electricity. Everybody's kind of ignoring scope 1. All right, we're actually going to have to divide the targets so that people actually spend some time on scope 1. So it was
Hmm.
really fascinating thing that happened, that everybody just said, oh, I'm just going to do renewable electricity. This is how I'm going to meet my target. And that's what was happening, which is a good thing, right? It is. The fact that they were kind of ignoring scope 1 and kicking that can the can, not the best thing. So that's why they're updating some of the guidance. But what we saw was a lot of our suppliers are going to move to this, whether we whether we're involved or not.
Hmm.
So we need to start taking that into consideration when we're forecasting what our emissions are going to look like in the future.
Hmm.
So I think that's largely what I meant by that is how do we understand the direction that they're going? Maybe we can help accelerate them, but I think they're all going in that direction anyway.
Okay.
We just need to make sure that we can forecast that appropriately.
Interesting. So remind the listener, if scope 2 is all about renewable electricity, what is scope 1 about?
Yeah, that's a good point. I just kind of dove right into these carbon terms, didn't I? Okay, easiest way, scope 1, think about fossil fuels in your buildings or your
Okay.
vehicles. That's scope 1.
Okay.
Scope 2 is just okay, the electricity you consume in your buildings and your vehicles.
Hmm.
That's really the easiest way to think about it between the two scopes. It is a little bit more nuanced, but majority of emissions are those.
Okay, so that would be like other ways of, let's say, heating a building, for example, than electricity. It would be the fuel that goes in your cars, your trucks, stuff like that.
Exactly. So you're talking natural gas or
Hmm.
propane or petrol or diesel. That's essentially all just combusting those.
Hmm.
That's all your scope 1. Obviously, then the thought is, all right, well, the only way to then go away from that scope 1 is, well, you have to stop doing that. What's the alternative way to heat or to
Hmm.
power your vehicle? And as we're seeing, that's heat pumps. It's electric vehicles, which then kind of all you're doing is really transitioning from scope 1 to scope 2. But then scope
Yeah.
2 has the awesome ability to say, well, I'll just get solar or wind to
Hmm.
make that power, and then that's how essentially you zero out, you transition out of scope 1, and then you zero out scope 2.
Okay. So scope 1 is also, I guess, then about electrifying parts of your processes, right? Whether it's EVs or putting something on the roof or something like that.
Exactly.
Okay, fantastic. Is that then something you guys are starting to think about working with value chain partners, customers, or suppliers on?
At this point, given the complexity of scope 1 for
Mhm.
different types of suppliers, so if you think about if it's a manufacturer, they might have heat loads that are associated with the process.
Mhm.
Uh, Whereas most suppliers, if you're talking heat, then you're just talking is space heating. So how do you space heat your warehouses? How do you space heat your offices? How do you space heat your manufacturing spaces? A lot more opportunities there. But again, at this point, given just the maturity curve of our suppliers, we're tackling the biggest, the easiest, and the biggest impact first, which is renewable electricity.
Okay, fantastic. You alluded a little bit to some changes going on right now with SBTI and kind of renewable electricity, carbon calculation, and stuff like that in general. Can you walk us a little bit through what's going on there right now?
Sure. And I am not the foremost expert in this, and it is constantly evolving. So by the
Mhm.
time this is uh,
It's
up
out. It's
online,
already outdated.
it probably already out of date. But at the moment, as of October 13th, here's the lay of the land. So SBTI, Science Based Target Initiative, they basically again they set the standard of what is a target that meets the Paris Agreement, the 1.5 C.
Mhm.
Historically, it's been okay. Have a scope 1 and 2 target that decreases 4.2% per year. Fairly simple, right? Scope 3 then got a little bit more crazy, um, and there's a lot of different avenues to get to it. They are evaluating the effectiveness of that program, and they're basically
Mhm.
saying it was effective in some areas, it was not effective in other areas, so we're going to modify.
Okay.
So the big one being, as I mentioned, everybody just did renewable electricity to solve their kind of their operational footprint. So the scope 1 and 2. They said, hey, that's great. That's what we wanted, but we really want you not to ignore scope 1, please.
Mhm.
So they're basically going to say, we're going to break out the two components, and we're going to make sure that you have a target for scope 1. So you're actually doing something there. And then, yes, you can have your scope 2 target too. Now, an interesting thing is, again, they were on the theory that we were not being granular enough with renewable electricity. So the fact that we put something in Spain,
Mhm.
and we're accounting it for manufacturing in Germany or Norway. They didn't see that as in their eyes as the best practice.
Okay.
So in the new standard, they are adding geographical and time matching requirements.
Hmm.
There will be probably some exceptions. And it's not finalized, so I can't tell you exactly what it's going to be like at the end of the day. But the thought is, hey, let's change the geographic. Let's make it a little bit more narrow. So it's a little bit more, again, supply is closer to demand.
Hmm.
And let's change how we do from a um, kind of a time matching. So if you think about it, when does solar get generated? Daytime, right?
During the day.
Not at night. So if my facility is operating 24/7, I'm today I'm saying, okay, well, this cool, solar facility in Spain is generating solar generally between, 10 and 4 mostly.
Hmm.
I'm going to use that claim for all 24 hours of my building's operation.
Mm.
Now, there are reasons why to do this. There's reasons why not to do this. At the end of the day, it becomes a question of what is the outcome that you want? Do you want to make sure that you are do you want to incentivize solar every single or renewable every hour of the day? Or do you want to just get as much renewables onto the grid as fast as humanly possible?
Hmm.
Those are really the two trade-offs. Um, the more you kind of require this hourly matching, this regional matching, the more difficult it becomes for anybody to build.
Yeah.
You're restricting the ability to build and the economics of it. At the moment, that seems to be the direction they want to go. Same with the GHG protocol.
Hmm.
Again, to be determined whether that's the final outcome or not, but that's the direction they've gone. The impact there is if it will slow down development. So
Yeah.
if you are an advocate for, hey, let's get as much on the grid as fast as humanly possible, market-based economics will kind of make it work at the end. They'll,
Mm.
and it will incentivize battery, it will incentivize other things.
Yeah.
Then you love the current system. And
Mm.
I think that's really the trade-off that we're starting to see when it comes to renewable electricity is this concept of scale at all cost or build to match exactly where the demand is.
Got it. And I guess is it correct to say that it's driven by, or it's a little bit driven by the huge success and the cost curves of solar, which I guess is the leading cost curves, right? And that being very daily, kind of very time sensitive versus, let's say, wind or hydro.
I think that's a very valid point. I think this concept has risen in discussions because of the rise of solar. I think with
Hmm.
wind is 24/7. Solar is obviously very daylight hours.
Yeah.
So, we're seeing significant impacts to the grid from a market pricing perspective and from a
Hmm.
generation perspective because we're concentrating so much power generation into such a small window.
Hmm.
Um, and if you don't have the battery or the other storage to basically shift that generation into other hours, then there are definitely some issues that get created that need to be worked out for sure.
Okay. And what's going on with batteries? Why is that not the easy solution to just store the energy?
So if you think about it, I mean, batteries are expensive.
Yeah.
Um, they're fairly quick to make. They're fairly quick to install. I think you've seen that in Australia. You've seen that in
Hmm.
California. You've seen that in China. Generally, if you're thinking about batteries, generally they're 2 or 4 hour in terms of what they're meant to do. So
Hmm.
they'll store it during the sun hours, and then they'll usually discharge in the evening. So usually you have the evening peak, everybody comes home, everybody turns on all their lights, all their appliances, then you have another big surge of need. And those batteries
Hmm.
really fit that need really well. Not so much once you're talking like midnight, up until it's solar again. That's just today though. I'm sure there's going to be advances and markets that are installing batteries faster have kind of dealt with this inequity of generation and demand much better.
Hmm.
So places like Australia, places like California, places like China, they don't have this weird what they call as bad a duck curve as some other
That
places.
what's the duct curve?
Duck curve. I don't know where it's always a dude. Like, where did this term come from? Why is it called a duck curve?
We're
Um,
so good with letters and acronyms in the sustainability
we really
industry. I don't know
are.
what's going on.
So the concept of a duck curve is very simple. So, historically you had power generators and they just had this nice little flat line. And like, okay, we're just going to power. Oh, we need to do a slightly more, 'cause we have more demand. Okay, we'll slightly do this. Now, with again the rise of solar, and this is really a solar phenomenon, is you have this crazy. So you got generation. Oh, it's sunny way up here, and then it comes. Oh, and then it's not sunny anymore. Okay, way back down here.
Mhm,
And that's the duck curve. You have this really weird profile of energy generation that's highly concentrated, again, 10 to 4-ish.
mhm,
The crazy thing that does then is if you think about, okay, is demand doing this crazy thing? No. Demand is doing this nice sinusoidal curve.
mhm,
So what you have is this weird craziness of, okay, well, we're generating way too much, at noon, and we're not generating enough at, 8 p.m. So from a market perspective, what happens when you have way more generation than you have demand? Prices just fall to the ground. And that's what we're seeing in Spain right now. Is during all those sunlight hours, you can basically just get electricity for free. In some
mhm.
cases, it's negative, meaning the developer's like, I'm going to pay you to take my electricity. Is that crazy for certain hours?
Interesting.
Which is, I think it's been great from a ratepayer perspective in
Mhm,
Spain. It's really tough for folks who doing the deals and
yeah.
funding these. The level of variability has been much higher than I don't want to say necessarily the forecasters of energy pricing, but I guess the modelers
Mhm,
of energy pricing kind of indicated a much more consistent, and now it's just all over the place. Um, but again, Spain doesn't quite have that battery to smooth it out compared
mhm,
to some other countries. My understanding is one, they're trying to do those again. They're trying to build more network into France, and they're trying to build more battery to again try to again it's a market condition. When you have free electricity, people are going to figure out a way to take advantage of it, right?
yeah, yeah. I was wondering that, right? Like, what happens in the market when you have super low cost of free electricity? Do you start getting an incentive to build battery farms? Like, is the economic rationale strong enough for that?
I think you'd have to ask a battery developer and then your next podcast to figure out what the economics
Good
look
idea.
like.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming yes. And then you have, think of things that will only work if you have really cheap electricity.
Mhm,
So green hydrogen only works if you have a whole bunch of really cheap electricity. So maybe green hydrogen, maybe that's an industry that works in that situation. So I think it does create some opportunities for industries that need a whole bunch of cheap electricity. And if it can be, emission free electricity, even better.
fantastic. Super interesting. Matt, do you have any perspectives on what's going on now with like the future forecast of energy demand with the AI build out and all of those things? It's a big
I'm not
question.
definitely not going to be claimed to be an expert here. I think you've seen the same forecast that I've seen. It's doubling, tripling. I think
Mhm,
in the US it's like 3.8%, and it's going to be like 8% in the next 5 to 10 years. That's a huge amount of power. Now, I think you're also seeing articles being out where, hey, maybe the build out is actually just becoming a bubble. I don't
mhm,
know. So does it all then compress? Don't know. Obviously, NVIDIA is trying its best to say, how do I increase the energy efficiency of all my chips? How much is that going to play into it? I don't know.
mhm,
Either way, I think we're definitely in a transformational period of the grid has to fundamentally shift to these huge, very large load centers. And how do you get power to those load centers? Do they build a power plant right next to it, which I think they're trying to do? If you talk about the world of nuclear, the
mhm,
concept was, how do I just build a mini nuclear plant right next to my power center, my data center, because that's what I need. And that way I don't put a massive strain on a whole bunch of infrastructure needing to get power from generated wherever to my one spot. So I think it'll be very interesting. I can't see electricity going I can't see demand going down. It can only go up, whether it's
Mm.
going to be AI, whether it's going to be electric vehicles, whether it's going to be the electrification of heat.
Yeah,
So, end of the day, the need is going to go up in the world, regardless of how much energy efficiency we can do at the end of the day.
and quite considerably potentially, right? Which
Yeah.
is interesting because then we go back to the former conversation of saying how microscopic do we need to be when we encourage infrastructure build outs, right?
Yep.
And that argument, I guess, has one line of argumentation if you kind of follow the existing demand curves, and a completely different line of argumentation if you suddenly need to triple electricity generation or something like that, right?
Yeah. I mean, one demonstration point of that, if, if you look at some of the data centers being built right now, the thought was always, hey, we want them to be, renewably energy powered. That was the
Mm,
concept. That was the talking point. And they're building them so fast, they're just putting natural gas, uh, like electricity generators, right next to the site.
mm,
So that speaks to, again, is it the concept? Do we want slower but more targeted renewable infrastructure, or do we want to? Is it for the world? We just need to scale as fast as humanly possible.
mm,
Wherever it makes sense, just scale it as fast as humanly possible. And I think that's going to be the fundamental argument, probably from renewable electricity over a lifetime of which do you want? Which is going to solve the fundamental problem? We're all trying to solve the same problem, climate change. There's
mm.
no discussion there. Which approach works better?
It's fascinating. You mentioned something else, and I'm gonna throw another random question at you, Matt. But you talked about putting a power plant next to, or some sort of generator next to your production, right? And I've noticed that a lot of companies are communicating on how much of their electricity they're gaining from the grid versus self-generated. And I've always been wondering a little bit like what's better here, completely decentralized, we put our own generators on the roof, maybe we could put it back into the grid, or big scale infrastructure investments that are more efficient, stuff like that. I don't have a clear
Yeah,
kind of line of thinking here. Do you have any opinion on that?
I do. So for me, it's fairly clear cut.
Okay.
If you can build it next to the demand and it makes
Mm,
sense,
okay.
do it. You avoid the whole infrastructure. So there's no argument for me. If you can build it right next to the demand, do it. Every time it's going to be cost effective. Gonna it's just gonna be better. The challenge is, so think about let's take a regular manufacturing site. If you put solar panels across the entire thing, you put it on the parking lot, you put it everywhere you can,
Hmm.
10, 15, maybe 20% of the demand of that facility can be absorbed by what you can put on the site. And that's
Okay.
just the fundamental disconnect is
Mm,
when if you're talking about homes can in most cases go one to one. But if you're
yeah.
talking manufacturing, and then if you get even to the crazy things like steel production, aluminum production, like you just can't build enough right on site unless you build like a nuclear power plant to really be able to facilitate that. So it's just if you can do it, but the reality is there's just not enough space to generate enough for that site. So that's why we have to do these really large projects in addition. So it's not an either or, it's an and.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay. So let's try to tie everything back to the original concept, which is, value chain, collaboration, etc. With everything going on with, you know, the requirements changing from the NGOs to potentially being able to put generators on the roof versus getting them to go into PPAs, power purchase agreements, etc. Like if you're sitting there as a sustainability manager right now, a supply chain, you're not doing anything about renewable electricity. Like, what would be your recommendations for them? How should they get started on this?
I think first step, set a clear expectation for your suppliers. And it will depend on what your goals are as an
Hmm.
organization, or even as a you're a regular consumer, what are your goals?
Hmm.
And then say, all right, to do that, I need all my suppliers to do X. It could be set a target, which is again a proxy for reductions, or it could just go straight to the bottom line, like Apple has done, and say, I need you're a key supplier for me. I expect that you're going to run your operations, at least for the products that you're helping me with 100% renewable electricity. I will help you work through different avenues to get there. I'll put you in touch with, great experts, with whatever. I think that's really the first step is, again, figure out what you need. If that's renewable electricity, great, to set expectation. And then provide resources to help them get there.
Fantastic. Okay. And how do you get access to these resources? Like, have you heard about any programs, anything like that, public resources, etc., that can help people get started?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, resources are aplenty. There's only too many. So if you go to any one of the major consultants, so Schneider Electric is a big one. They have tons of material. If you go to your local or federal government, so the US EPA has a lot of information. I'm not as familiar with the European countries, but I'm sure they have plenty of information out there. So generally there's a lot of free resources. And then yes, if you want to, pay for additional advice, there's plenty of vendors right now that are dedicated to saying, how do I help you go ahead and get renewable electricity? And there's a lot of options. You don't have to, if you're small, you don't have to do a purchase and power agreement. You can just work with your utility company and just do it with your utility company. You can go on the open market, work with some brokers, and just go purchase what you need for that year or for multiple years. So depending on your situation, there's a lot of different options. You don't have to have the legal team involved if you don't want to go the more complicated one. Like, that's not a requirement.
That's probably good news to some.
Yeah.
And do you know of any great resources off the top of your head for the value chain component, if you want to kind of start working with your value chain customers or suppliers on renewable electricity?
I would say I'm going to try to keep this industry agnostic.
Okay.
There's a great group called the Scope 3 peer group.
Yeah.
It has a lot of, again, supply chain practitioners in that, and they're focused on, again, how do I help my suppliers from mature to not mature? How do I help them along that journey? Renewable electricity is a big component of that. Obviously, they tackle a lot of other issues as well. I don't know the exact website, but if you Google Scope 3 peer group, you'll probably run into them.
Amazing. We'll try to link to some of these resources in the show note. Matt, this was amazing. Any last word you want to leave us with on renewable electricity?
I think the last word goes back to the original. Renewable electricity is by far the biggest impact that we can have on climate change at the quickest amount of speed. For me, it's just, how do we scale it? Anything that we can do, any approaches, any incentives to scale it faster, I think is how we really make a dent into climate change.
Fantastic. That was a nice way to tie a ribbon on it. Matt, that was great. Thank you so much for coming on Next Frontier.
No, thank you very much, Thomas. It's been a great time.
If you're still here, then first of all, thank you so much for listening. If you've got thoughts about this episode or what you'd like to hear more of, you can email us at thomas@nextfrontier.earth. We really do read every email. You can also hit me up directly on LinkedIn. Just search for Thomas Buch Andersen. That's Thomas B-U-C-H Andersen. If you feel like it, please share with your friends and subscribe wherever you listen to our podcast. We also have a YouTube channel. It's on @NextFrontierEarth if you want to see what we actually look like in person. And if you really love the show, hit us with that 5-star review. Today's episode was produced and edited by Christina S02, and Next Frontier music is by Keyhole. See you next time.